Hello, my name is Joe Fouts, and I am a software engineer here at LIDP Consulting. And in this video, I will be showing you a live demonstration of how easy it is to deploy our titanium edition of the administrator to a standalone JEE application server. This demonstration will consist of three components. The first component is our standard GEM client GUI. The second component is our titanium client listener. And our third component is our titanium edition of the administrator running under a Java Enterprise Edition application server. For this demonstration, I will be using the open source JBoss EAP 6.1 JEE Application Server. Once I get the server up and running, another goal of mine will be to verify that all three types of processes are successfully executing within titanium, and those processes are foreground processing, report generation processing, and background processing. For this demonstration, I will be using titanium's full deployment jar file, and that jar file was generated from our selective ANT build script. And the script simply extracted the source code from our source code repository to generate this full deployment jar file. The full deployment jar file will consist of all of the processes for titanium. And again, those are foreground, report generation, and background processing. So the first thing I'm going to do is copy the full deployment jar file to the JEE server's deployment folder. The deployment jar file resides in our titanium build folder, and I'm simply just going to copy that in the server deployment folder. So with that, I'm going to go back to my desktop. And first off, I'm going to bring up the folder where the titanium build deployment jar files are generated. And for this demonstration, I'm going to select and copy the full deployment jar file, and then bring up the application, the JEE application server's standalone deployment folder, and simply paste the deployment jar file into that folder. I'll simply close those folders. And now the next steps I'm going to do is to start the three components. I will start the GEM client GUI. I will then start the titanium client listener, and then start the JBoss's JEE application server. Once I get the application server up and running, I will then go on to verify that the foreground, report generation, and background processing are working successfully. I will go back to my desktop. And from the desktop, I'm going to bring up the three components. I'm going to bring up Gem, which I've already, for time constraints, have signed in to. And I will then bring up the two command prompts for the client listener and the JBoss's JEE Application Server. So with that, I'm going to just simply start the client listener and then start the JEE Application Server. I've added some debugging statements so that as activity does happen, we will see some print lines be displayed on the console to verify that activity. So we can see the server is started. What I'm going to do now is test the three processes of Titanium. And for the foreground processing, I'm going to be using the SIGU transaction, which is the maintain user profile. And I'm simply going to retrieve my own user profile. And you can see it comes back accepted and displays the profile information on the Gem screen. If you look at the console, you can see that I did have a couple print lines displayed that the transaction has started and completed. And again, if I do that a couple times, you could see that activity happen on the server's console. The next test will be for the report generation processing, and I'm going to be using the RWGR generate report transaction. In this test, I'm going to be using the GLED report extracts. So I will retrieve those extracts and then process them. And for this transaction, what's going to happen is that the transaction will come back to the user saying that the report generation process has started. And then we should see some activity on the console for that. And what the report generation process will do will generate the GLED report. And I have selected all 5 of the formats: XML, PDF, HTML, CSV, and FO. So it will generate all 5 of those formats. I'll submit that transaction. We'll see it come back to the screen as saying report generation is started and completed. And if I go ahead and just process it again, you will see that that activity on the console shows that the report generation process has started and completed. For the final test, what I'd like to do is use the test transaction. And in this transaction, I'm going to manually start our ADMF background transaction, which is used for client processing. And once I submit this transaction, we'll see the background transaction as being scheduled. And the delay on that schedule is 30,000 milliseconds. And what that's telling me is that there are no client records ready to be processed by the client background transaction. So what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to bring up a job I have that I'm going to run to schedule all of our client records in the system to have activity and ready for work. And what you will see now on the server console is I have some debugging statements showing the keys of the client records that are being processed, and you could clearly see that the client records are being processed. So again, if I go to the foreground transaction, you can see that the server is processing foregrounds. If I go to the RWGR transaction, you could see that the server is processing the report generation processes, and then you can clearly see that the console is showing that the ADMF background transaction is processing the client records. So in conclusion, I think I have clearly demonstrated how easy it is to deploy Titanium to a standalone JEE server. And after successfully deploying the deployment jar file to that server, I was able to successfully run the foreground processing, the report generation processing, and background processing on the Titanium system. Again, I'm Joe Fouts, and if you have any questions or comments, please drop me an email at foutjoe@lidp.com. And also, if you would like to learn more about Titanium, please visit www.lidp.com. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation.